Hello, welcome to my Arcane Mage guide for how to play it as we head into Season 1. If you're viewing this after a significant period of time has passed, I'd recommend cross-referencing the information here with either Mage Hub or Wowhead. I'll have links to those in the pinned comment. You can jump to the part of the rotation that you would like to see on the timeline below. We will of course be starting with single target, and this is our single target talent tree. One of the major differences, if you have viewed Mage Hub, is we take impetus and not a second point of improved arcane missiles. Just better, but it doesn't matter too much. Now, there's two main talents that you're really going to want to pay attention to when you're first, starting to look at the arcane tree. We're going to define our playstyle, and that's Nether Precision, where consuming clear casting increases the damage of your next two arcane blasts by 20%. This is going to define our conserve and touch phase, where we will be rotating using clear casting with consuming nether precision. So it'll be clear casting to arcane blast, clear casting to arcane blast. And an important interaction this buff has is with concentration, where your arcane blast has a chance to cause your next clear casting to not be consumed, because it lets you get a free clear casting, but the clear casting isn't consumed. This missiles won't actually generate nether precision, so that's why it's really helpful to have a weak aura, which will tell you if you have nether precision or not, because there will be times where you do not generate nether precision because it was from a concentrated clear cast thing. And the easiest way to do that is either track concentration or track nether precision. You can see here, this is my track nether precision down here. And those are the main talents I want to talk about. The rest of them, you'll just get an idea of how to use them as we go through the rotation. And then there are two more talents I'd like to talk about. The first one's going to be Siphon Storm. This changes Evocate from a purely a mana regeneration tool into mainly a burst tool. Really, you're just going to be casting it before you cast Arcane Surge, and I'll show you that later on in the rotation. Additionally, Arcane Echo is a very important talent to pay attention to because it's only active when Touch the Magi is active, and every damage instance on the target will proc an additional AOE damage dealing thing. So this means that each missile from Arcane Missiles procs it multiple times. You can see it's just exploding. More importantly, each tick of Nether Tempest procs it twice, because Nether Tempest has a direct damage tick and then also does this little fly thingy, right, where and then lands and does damage again. So Nether Tempest procs Arcane Echoes quite a lot, and that's the reason we're mainly taking this talent, because it makes your cooldown phase pretty insane. It is pretty good to upkeep in AoE, but you don't really care about keeping up in AoE. You mainly press it during or in single target, you mainly press it during your cooldowns, which I will be getting into now. Here is a depiction of what your burn is going to look like. Arcane's Radiant Spark ramp here is going to always be the same, except for if you have Arcane Surge, then Arcane Surge is going to replace one of the Arcane Blasts during the rotation, but we'll get to that in a second. So you enter your mini burn when you have Rune of Power, Radiant Spark, and Touch the Magi off cooldown. If you also have Arcane Surge off cooldown, you'll do a different rotation, which we'll get into after this. But the way that Radiant Spark works is it's a 10% damage buff stacking based on a debuff on the enemy. So, here's a number showing you what the debuff number is when we're casting a certain ability. So at 0, it has no damage buff, 1, 10%, 2, 20%, 3, 30%, and then 4 is a 40%. So this barrage is going to do 40% more damage, which is why we're using barrage there. It does big damage. And then you use Touch of the Magi off the GCD. This will refill your arcane charges, and Touch the Magi calculates or adds damage to its bank basically when it's done to the target. So as long as you cast this before Arcane Barrage lands, you're fine. And then you'll enter your Touch of the Magi phase, which this is showing you what your cast sequence would look like. These are clear casting only missiles. So you clear cast missiles, then you use 2 Arcane Blasts because of Nether Precision, back to clear cast missiles, 2 Arcane Blasts because of Nether Precision, and then back to clear cast if you have it. If you don't, then you would just use Arcane Blast. This is your conserve rotation, so I wouldn't get too overwhelmed with what you're going to be doing in Touch the Magi, because it's literally just what you're doing in conserve. So this part you kind of don't have to pay too much attention to. In execute, your last global of Touch of the Magi is just going to be you sending a barrage, so that being 35% or below. If you're above that, then you can use a Presence of Mind Arcane Blast as the last GCD, but that's not too big of a deal outside of using Presence of Mind elsewhere. So like I said, Mini Burn, this is entirely scripted up here. When you have only Rune of Power, Radiant Spark, and Touch the Magi off cooldown, you will always do this sequence in single target. Rune, Radiant Spark, 4 Arcane Blast, and then you Nether Tempest Barrage. Nether Tempest is set up for your Touch the Magi window to proc Arcane Echoes a bunch, and then Barrage just does a bunch of damage. So now this is your big damage cooldown. This is when you, instead of having Rune of Power, Radiant Spark, and Touch the Magi off cooldown, also have Arcane Surge and Evocate off cooldown. So because of Siphon Storm, you're going to channel your Evocate right before using your Rune of Power, or if you just run out of mana, like 3 seconds before Rune of Power. Arcane Surge or Evocate takes 5 seconds to channel, so you just start channeling it when Rune of Power has 5 seconds left on its cooldown, and you're good to go. And then you'll just enter your burn phase much the same, where you Rune of Power, Radiant Spark, use, in this case, only 3 Arcane Blasts, and then you're going to Arcane Surge, Nether Tempest Barrage, Touch the Magi. And your Touch the Magi phase is exactly the same. So this may look a little bit confusing, right, because it's changing, but the only one thing that's changing here really is you're replacing Arcane Blast with Arcane Surge on the 3rd stack. And I do recommend a weak aura that will just show you if you're on the 3rd stack. It'll show you the other stacks as well. It just is helpful for you to remember, I'm supposed to Arcane Surge here. I think the thing that most people I've seen have struggles with is pre-evocating, but once you tie these cooldowns to each other, essentially. So if your Evocate is about to come off cooldown, then your next burn is going to do this, where you're using Arcane Surge on the 3rd stack of Radiant Spark. Otherwise, you're doing your mini burn again. So, okay, to give you an idea of the Conserve Priority, I also just kind of wrote out everything else, so this would be potentially handy to look at. But your Conserve Priority is pretty simple. It's a little overcomplicated with some conditionals, but basically you're an Arcane Orb as your highest priority if you don't have 2 Arcane Charges, which is basically only on Opener or after you Barrage, though of course it's not necessary in your Burst because you have Touch the Magi to give you all your charges back. Then you're going to Shifting Power. The only time you cast this really is right after your Arcane Surgeons. You don't cast it any other time in single target. Your next highest priority is to clear cast with 3 stacks of clear casting so that you don't overcap it. Then you're going to Arcane Blast with Nether Precision. If you're below 60% mana at this point, and also your mini burn is next, you're going to want to Barrage. You can ignore Surge as your next burn because you're going to Evocate, which is fine. Between your mini burn and your Surge burn, that is 45 seconds. You can afford to spend mana a little bit more aggressively because you have Evocate coming up. And then after that would be clear casting missiles to keep your Nether Precision up. And then just Arcane Blast if you don't have clear cast missiles. So yeah, this will be easier to see or understand after you see the gameplay rotation of it. And then Touch the Magi, as I said, is kind of a truncated version of this Conserve Priority, or like a smaller version of it, where you're just Arcane Blasting with Nether Precision. You're going to clear cast if you don't have Nether Precision, and then just Arcane Blast if you don't have either. So your Opener then is just going to be your Surge Burn with Evocate cast before combat, and then you get Arcane Orb because you only have 1 Arcane Charge, and then you would Rune, Radiant Spark, do your 3 Arcane Blasts into Arcane Surge, and then Nether Tempest Barrage, Touch the Magi, and into your Touch the Magi window. So it is worth noting, you could also just say Arcane Barrage as last global and execute. Yeah. This is how the rotation is pre-summed up. If any of you do want to use the images that I had earlier, while practicing rotation, I'm going to have an Imgur link in the description, and Toe Grinders is a little bit easier to see on Mage Hub because his is all in one line. So you could also use that resource. All right, I will be showing you this showcase of the rotation. You can see my casts on the right. Notice I do have 3 Arcane Charges. That's because I was just taking the target dummy. Normally you'd only have 1 there, which is why I Arcane Orbed. Anyway, entering my burst phase, 3 Arcane Blasts, into a Surge, another Tempest. You'll notice I ignored Arcane Harmony on opener. That's what you should do outside of Lust, but we'll cover that in Conditionals. Doing my Conserve rotation during Touch of the Magi. I'm going to end it with a Presence of Mind Arcane Blast as the last GCD. As soon as my Surge ends, I'm going to Shifting Power. And I'm in my Conserve rotation of rotating between my Nether Precision Arcane Blast and my Clear Casting. You can see I used 2 missiles there because I didn't gain Nether Precision from the first one, which would be because concentration procced. Again, concentration, so I'm using missiles again, so I have Nether Precision when I'm casting Arcane Blast. Happened here as well. I palm Arcane Blast for the last GCD. There, I probably shouldn't have Nether Tempest. I had enough mana that I could have kept blasting before my Evocate, so that was a mistake, but... I am getting pretty lucky with my Clear Casting. But again, we're doing the same burst rotation here. And then as soon as my Surge ends, right, so here I'm looking to Presence of Mind Arcane Blast in the last global, and then as soon as my Surge ends, I want to use Shifting Power. And that's it. Arcane has a couple conditionals, mainly based on Lust and Execute, but, you know, pretty simple. Wowhead goes a lot more in depth into them, I believe, but basically, if you have Lust on your opener, then you're going to force cast missiles. You'll see a gameplay example of that right after this, and then you also need more mana management if you're Lusting. The main ways that you do that, the first one is going to be just upkeeping Nether Tempest in single target. So what that means is you just want to use Nether Tempest at 4 arcane charges when it's not active on the target already. Again, you'll see an example of that you just do that between your Surge and your mini burn, and generally you're pretty fine. And then also in Lust, where that barraging at 60% was, you will now instead, I guess, barrage at 85% mana during Lust, just to conserve better. And then once you get below 70% mana, you'll use Ice Nova. And all of this is just to ensure that you have enough mana to do your mini burn and then also make it to your Evocate. There's a couple more lines, like when to Fire Blast and Frostbolt, but that's kind of overkill, so I'm not going to mention that. For Execute, you use Arcane Barrage as the last GCD in Touch of the Magi instead of a Presence of Mind Arcane Blast. I guess I can mention one more, because if you're looking at sims, you're probably going to be confused. The sim will add an extra Arcane Blast during Lust before using Arcane Barrage. I wouldn't recommend doing that. It's very, very minor, and it will probably just confuse you. And I will not be doing it myself. So, but you can. I think Wowhead talks about that. I'm not going to though. This is going to be our AOE talent tree. You're just removing Arcane Familiar and improved Arcane Missiles for your second Orb charge, and then also Arcane Cleave. You're going to keep Impetus over Arcane Familiar because mana is not important and the damage this does is pretty negligible. Also, improved Arcane Missiles does nothing in AOE, so you'd rather have Impetus because it has a chance to actually impact your AOE damage if you proc this during your Radiant Spark ramp where you are using Arcane Blast in AOE. So otherwise, not much changes. You're still taking Nether Tempest, still taking Arcane Echo, everything else is the same that I didn't mention. So your AOE rotation is going to start at 3 targets, and this is a depiction of your mini burn. Like with single target, your Radiant Spark phase is entirely scripted. It's your Touch of the Magi one that it becomes a priority list. So for AOE, for your first stack of Radiant Spark, you're either going to generate through Arcane Explosion if you have more than 3, so 3 or more Arcane charges, or if you have less than 3, you use Arcane Orb. The Surge one will use Orb, so it gives you a good depiction of both. So you just open with a Arcane Explosion or Orb into a Nether Tempest. You're going to Barrage on your first stack, and then you're going to touch the Magi while that's traveling. And then your second and third stack you're going to consume with Arcane Blast. And then your fourth stack is just going to be a Barrage. And then you're into your Touch the Magi window, where you'll basically be prioritizing Clearcast Missiles, and then building to 4 stacks, and then using your Barrage. So looking at the Surge Burn, it's a little bit different. For starters, we are of course channeling Evocate earlier, or right before our burn. We're not going to Rune of Power here at all. We just start with a Radiant Spark. I had Surge here for the 0 stack. This also could be Arcane Explosion if you were at 3 or more Arcane Charges. Then your first stack is going to be consumed with Arcane Surge. You're going to Nether Tempest after your Arcane Surge. Then you're going to Barrage on your second stack, use Touch the Magi. Your third stack is going to be an Arcane Blast, and then a Barrage, and you're once again into the Touch the Magi rotation of Clearcast Missiles, and then building to 4 stacks and consuming them. I will show you a rundown of the AOE priority list. So here's what your priority list is going to look like. One thing to mention, just for Conserve, is that unlike in single target, Nether Tempest is a gain to maintain, so you will be wanting to cast it rotationally, about every 10-12 seconds. And in Touch the Magi, your AOE priority is just Arcane Missiles with clear casting, Arcane Orb if you don't have 4 charges, and then Barrage if you do have 4 charges, and then Explosion. So pretty simple AOE priority. You'll see that in the gameplay example I'm about to do. For your Conserve in AOE, you're going to Arcane Orb if you have less than 4 charges, Shifting Powers next highest priority, then Ice Nova, then Upkeeping Nether Tempest, only with 4 charges though, because its damage does scale with Arcane charges. Then you're going to Arcane Missiles with clear casting. This is assuming you have Arcane Harmony. There is a build that doesn't play it, which I will also cover. And then you would Arcane Barrage at 4 Arcane charges, and then Arcane Explosion is last on the list. So this is Phosphorus, by the way, if any of you watch his channel. But Arcane Explosion there because I had 3 charges already. Oops, I meant to Arcane Ice Nova there. Anyway, that gives you a good idea of what your AoE rotation is going to look like. So there is another build I haven't mentioned yet for Mythic Plus. This is going to be playing with Mana Gem, and you're playing with Cascading Power, which just generates more clear casting, and you're just going to use this during your Surge Touch of the Magi window. So just a build that's mainly focused on stacked cleave, and also potentially viable in Mythic Plus as well. But yeah, so I recommend you give this build a try for yourself, but I'll just give you an example of how it plays. It plays almost the exact same. You just use Mana Gem during Touch of the Magi. So you open with your Arcane Orb, Rune, Radiant Spark, 3 Arcane Blasts, into your Surge, Nether Tempest, Barrage, Touch of the Magi, and then I just use Mana Gem. And then I'm in my normal Touch the Magi rotation. You just use Mana Gem when you wouldn't overcap on clear casting. So if you had 2 clear casting there, you would just aggressively spend it first before using your Mana Gem to generate another 2. And this is the same way you use it in AoE. It's just used with Surge's Touch the Magi window. So yeah. Guarantees a lot of echoes procs. Pretty good. So for weak auras, the main one that there's gonna be two that I recommend, but this one is necessary. You can't play Arcane without this. I'll link it below. What this does is it introduces a delay to when your barrage is cast under certain circumstances, which, I said you can look at Wowhead's guide for it. Essentially, what this does would be make your barrage behave like you think it will behave, without having any knowledge of how like Harmonic Echo or Radiant Spark or like Barrage works. Basically, Arcane Barrage is snapshotted, so if you use it at the wrong times, it won't gain the benefit that you expect it to gain. Whatever. You're going to want to download this and use a macro for it. I'll link it below. It's made by Vardex. The ones that I think you should download are Radiant Spark. This shows you your increment level of Radiant Spark. You've seen me use it throughout this video. I'll also link that. And then Nether Precision, because this is a very important part of your entire rotation. So yeah, those are the three main ones. Two are suggested, one that's, entirely required. Aside from that, there's nothing else I really want to cover for this video. If you're doing M0s, obviously this is a very, very long rotation, so mobs are going to die before you get it off. I would still suggest practicing this rotation. There's better forms of burst that you could do to suit an M0, but it would be harmful to your long-term learning of the spec. And it's not worth it for you gaining 5k more overall for these 2 weeks where only M0s are active. So I'd recommend just sticking with the current best burst rotations. And yeah, like I said at the beginning of the video, if you're viewing this in the future, I think you should really double check with Mage Hub and Wowhead, or what I'm saying is accurate. Some of these are different between Mage Hub and Wowhead. That's because I'm going off the APL, which both of them are, but for instance, Porum's probably done a lot more APL work than Toe for Arcane, because Porum's a big Arcane person. Impetus is just better single target than improved Arcane missiles for the second point, which is what Toe has in his guide. It's also just better AoE, but yeah. So if you have any questions, leave them in the comments below. Have a good rest of your day. Hope this was helpful. I'll do one for Frost probably, and it will take me far less time than this Arcane one took me. I had to pause 3 times while I was making this because I was like, holy shit, there's so many things to cover for Arcane, and it's kind of annoying. Not gonna lie, kind of annoying. So, but the written guides for Arcane are honestly amazing. Toe's guide is mainly how I learned the rotation for Dragonflight, so I highly recommend it if you really like looking at written guides. I hope this has been a good visual representation for you. So I felt like I was a bit remiss in, not actually covering the reasons for that weak aura and just for Arcane's weird behavior in general. So again, highly suggest this. If you do download it, it has its macro on the website or on YAO in the description, and it just replaces your normal barrage keybind. And the main reason that we use this is because barrage is snapshotted, which means its damage is calculated on cast. You'll find other abilities or its damage is calculated like when they land. For instance, most of Frost's abilities are that way. But anyway, Barrage being snapshot means it has very weird interactions when it's queued in certain scenarios. So for instance, if you were to queue Arcane Barrage after an Arcane Surge, you would be missing 40% damage amp. I believe it's from the Rune of Power. Your Arcane Barrage doesn't benefit from the Rune of Power. But regardless, it either doesn't benefit from Surge Buff or it doesn't benefit from the Rune of Power if queued. You would need to marginally delay it by, say, 0.2 seconds, which is what the Weak Aura does in that situation, to ensure that your Barrage gains the full benefit for pretty much no downside. Additionally, in Radiant Spark, which is the more important interaction, you'll need it because of partially the way Harmonic Echo works. So Harmonic Echo only works on abilities that consume Radiant Spark's vulnerability. So that would be, for instance, if I do this, my orb did proc echo, this procs an echo, that procs an echo, that procs an echo, and if I blast into Barrage here, my blast procced an echo, my Barrage did not. But since Barrage is snapshotted, that Arcane Blast into Barrage actually still benefited from the 40% damage amp on both the Blast and the Barrage. The problem is the Blast was what consumed my Harmonic Echo, which is why in Lust we do that extra Arcane Blast because it's just more damage and single target. However, once you reach Execute, the Bombardment bumping the Arcane Barrage's damage up to by 100% means that you want your Barrage to proc the Harmonic Echo. And then also as soon as you leave single target, so you're in 2 target or what else, you really want your Arcane Barrage to be proccing that Harmonic Echo. Additionally, with the way Radiant Spark works, you'll notice that I did a blast into Barrage at the final stack of Radiant Spark, and it did both the Arcane Blast and the Barrage were buffed by 40%. And so that's reproducible all the time. The reason that happens is because of Barrage being snapshotted, but it's also the reason why you can't do a Radiant Spark into 4 Arcane Blasts and then here cue my Barrage. You can see it lagged my screen. I was only able to cue that Barrage because I have the weak aura. If I didn't have the weak aura, what would have happened was my Barrage would have benefited from the 3rd stack of Radiant Spark, but consumed the 4th. So you're just missing 10% damage if you do it that way. So that's why the weak aura is very helpful. But yeah, anyway, hope that's a good explanation. Aside from that, Nether Tempest actually has like travel time on its secondary projectile. So, there's, I think, a haste breakpoint where you might use it before Surge in your burn, but that's kind of theory crafty. So that's why it's just not mentioned at all in this video. And then there's also a thing with Arcane Missiles where if you cancel it after the second to last tick with the Clearcast missiles, your second missiles does more missile ticks. So you can see, like, I don't know, my second missiles was like 9 ticks or something, and I don't know, whatever. I don't know the whole reason behind it. That's an Arcane thing. You just like cancel it after a certain thing, and then you have more ticks. And like Dwarven's cast bar, I used to like the SimC people. This is the one that I use. It's the only one that like has the accurate number of missiles ticks after you do that. But that's, I think, kind of not important. So I wouldn't worry too much about that. And yeah, I think that covers everything. I guess we can talk a little bit about bugs. For Nether Tempest, there's a bug in AOE where it'll just go on a different target. I might not do it if I'm refreshing, but basically there's a bug where it won't go on the target you're targeting. So maybe they fixed it because I'm not getting it, or maybe it has something to do with arcane charges. Who knows? Anyway, that's a bug you'll encounter a lot. Also, Arcane Echoes consumes Clearcast, or not Clearcast. Arcane Echoes consumes Ice Flows, so you can't really use Ice Flows during Touch the Magi. But anyway, that's kind of the important, like, more obscure things to cover that not everyone really needs to know. So yeah, already did the outro, but have a good day again, I guess.